blood, sex, death, life, passion, and good fortune. Red has dominated human history for 50,000 years. Wars have been fought, continents conquered, stories told, all about humanity's oldest paint. So I've got my paints ready. None of the brands will be a surprise. Golden, Kimera, Vallejo, Citadel, and a few others too. But we'll get to that. It's safe to say I'm a fan of this colour. Red is so wound up in our history that using it has a meaning, even if it's only subconscious. So that's my first point. Because of all those cultural layers, you can use red to convey emotion, to give subtle, or not so subtle meaning to the things that you're painting. Want to make a face look more alive? Add a red glaze over its cheeks. Want to make it look rich and powerful? Give it a red cloak. I don't think I've ever talked about this before, but outside of YouTube and outside of running a charity, I also run a tour company, showing tourists around the Stonehenge area, which involves chatting around prehistory. And so I thought in this video I'd lean into that a little bit. Don't worry, it will be relevant to paint eventually though. The story of red starts with a pigment called hematite, which is made from the compound anhydrous iron oxide, or rust. It occurs all over the world, in a variety of hues from light pink to the deepest crimson colour, and it's been used by mankind since the early Paleolithic period, or at least 50,000 years ago. In fact, in November 1980, anthropologist Ernst E. Reschner stated that its use was one of the two meaningful regularities in human evolution, the other being the use of tools. So yeah, red is pretty important. So what's this got to do with painting plastic toys? Well, only that I think it's important to understand something if you're going to use it. And red is a colour with lots of emotional layers.
Like onions.
They stink?
Yes. No.
For example, hematite was used as a death shroud by the ancient Egyptians, so they would mummify their dead in red cloth before sending them off to Osiris, who was also known as the Lord of the Red Cloth. Okay, so red's got baggage. Great, let's paint something. I'm going to chuck a couple of paints onto the palette. First off a heavy body, then Citadel's Mephiston red, then some paints from Kimera. There's no such thing as the perfect red. Some are more transparent, some are warmer, some are colder, and you might like to experiment to find the one you like. There's no perfect tone, it's all just about preference. Personally, I like really saturated colours, and for me the best for that is Kimera's the red. Whichever paint you choose, and it's up to you, take some time to learn its properties. How to thin it, when it breaks, do you need to use a medium, and then go to town, have fun. When you actually use red though, what can throw some people is its transparency. As most hobby paints that we use are opaque and they're designed to cover in one or two coats, this can sometimes seem scary, but actually it's one of the best things about the colour. In my Slapshot video I talked about underpainting or using a zenithal to add some information before you paint it. Then when you paint your red coat over the top, you've got some shading done for free. As technology progressed, we gain access and new knowledge to different types of pigments. In the Roman times this happened when hematite and others like it were replaced by vermilion, and in the ruins of Pompeii they discovered incredible artworks because the Romans were absolutely obsessed with that gorgeous red pigment. This pigment though is Kimera's the red, which in my opinion is the best red on the market. Just to hammer home the point, this is the 3 shades of paints painted onto a model. This is Citadel's Mephiston red, just as the first coat, going over the top of a corn red base. This is Kimera's the red, and you can see there's a dramatic difference in the amount of saturation in that paint. It does have a matte finish though, so if you don't like that, you won't like this colour. And finally, the next paint is Golden Acrylics. This is a heavy body paint, really transparent, quite odd and gloopy with a glossy finish. However, it does have its uses, as we'll see later. Now you can just leave a paint job flat like that. But to make a paint more interesting, you can add more information. For me, more information, even if it's subtle, gives a better looking paint job. We're often told that the secret to a good paint job is contrast, or the difference in value from light to dark areas. So you could just make the shadows black and the highlights white. This is why zenithals are often the best looking bit of a paint job. So let's improve things. For this we're going to use a colour wheel. Colour wheels were literally invented to show complementary or contrasting colours, and they're amazing how consistently they work. Talking about consistency, I've got a favour to ask. I've just set up a brand new Discord server. It's free and I'd love to welcome you there. The link's down below. Along with that, I've done a very YouTuber type thing and set up a Patreon as well. So if you've got a bit of spare cash and you like what we do on here, by all means visit there, the link's down below, and give me a support. It means a huge amount. And just for consistency's sake, like, subscribe, comment. Thank you very much. Now back to the video. Here is red. Its opposite is green. If you use a green colour as a shadow, you can get popping shadow with a little bit more visual interest. And I use this to good effect on my Blood Angels. Saturated red and dark green shadows makes them look much less cartoony and a little bit more menacing. This is so simple, there's absolutely no reason not to give it a go. Simply take any old green, this is just Kimera's Phthalo Green, thin it down and apply it into those recesses. I usually use an airbrush for this because you get a slightly smoother gradient, but there's no reason you can't just do this with a brush using a nice thin glaze consistency as well. It looks a little strange right at the beginning, but by the end you'll end up with a really subtle transition and just some slightly more interest in those shadows. If you don't like the idea of using green as a shadow colour, you can also use a colour wheel to work out your shadows, like this. Basically, take the colour you're working with, in this case red, and head down the colour wheel to the darkest shades, and that'll give you sort of the colours you want to use for your shadows. So in this case, heading towards a violet or purple. That gives a lovely rich sort of look. The quest for the perfect red wasn't just about contrast though. Sometimes it was about saturation, and in the 14th century they found the brightest red yet, the dye cochineal, a pigment which is made from crushing tiny little beetles that's still widely in use today under the pseudonym E120, was so valuable that the Spanish conquered Central and South America in order to secure it. And once they'd done so, funded their empire by selling it the world over, from China to Cambodia, to Venice and the Vatican. In the year 1587 alone, £144,000 of cochineal was exported to Spain. In other money, that's 72 tons, or nearly 10 billion beetles. While cochineal is still in use as a food colouring or a dye, in terms of paint pigments, most of the pigments we use today are synthetic. As a result, we've got loads of different options. One of my favourites is to underpaint in a brighter colour and then glaze red over the top. Just like this. With an airbrush this is easily achieved by spraying down an orange, then going over that with a red, and then going over again with an even brighter red. Or you can apply a pale pink with a brush, and then just glaze over the top of it. When you glaze over the top of it, you'll gradually shift it more and more to red, hiding that hard edge and ending it with a nice smooth transition. Just like that. So I'm using heavy body acrylics to glaze here, but you can use any paint if you like. The trick to glazing is to make sure you take your brush off where you want to leave the paint. In this case, on the transition between that pale pink and where we want to be red. It takes some real patience to glaze. In this case, it took 6 or 7 attempts to get the finish that I wanted, and to be quite frank, I probably could have done 6 or 7 more. This is how I decided to leave it. Not bad. It also works the opposite way around though. So for example, when painting purple, you can head up the wheel to highlight. It works both ways. So I thought I'd leave you with a story. And don't worry, there is a point to this. So it's 1606 in London. An incredible inventor, Cornelius Drebbel, who was already known for inventing the world's first submarine, and the thermometer, was working away at his lab. Today, he was rendering some cochineal. Do you remember those tiny little beetles the Spanish went mad for? So he took a bowl of bubbling purple liquid and set it on his tin windowsill to cool down. And quite by mistake, he happened to drop a vial of acid on the windowsill alongside it. As the vial smashed and splashed acid into the cooling mix, it turned a bright scarlet red. And thus he invented the process to stabilise cochineal into something useful for industry. And that pigment was then used for the next 300 years. Now, he didn't set about to do this, he was just playing with stuff. And that's the lesson I would take away from this. Keep experimenting, keep messing around with stuff. You never know when something amazing is going to happen. Thanks so much.